Most people remember Mike Tyson as an unstoppable force, a boxer who demolished opponents with terrifying speed and power. He became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, a living legend who seemed invincible. But the story of Iron Mike is not only about victories and belts. It's also about the wounds he carried long before the cameras ever found him. The truth is that Tyson's violence wasn't born in the ring. It was born in fear, trauma, and a childhood where survival was the only rule. The real tragedy of his life isn't the scandals or the headlines. It's the fact that every knockout, every championship, and every public triumph was built on a foundation of pain he never learned to heal. A broken boy in Brownsville. Before the world saw a champion, Tyson was a frightened kid wandering the streets of Brownsville, New York. He was hungry, scared, and invisible to everyone who wasn't already in trouble. People often talk about his knockout power like it was supernatural, but the truth is darker. His strength was a response to terror. Tyson learned early that nobody would protect him, so he became his own defender. He was robbed, beaten, and mocked until he didn't know what family even meant. He fought not because he wanted glory, but because he had no other choice. Violence became his language, and survival became his identity. He didn't grow into a fighter, he was forced to become one. The man who saw something else. Then came the person who changed everything. Cus D'Amato didn't just teach Tyson how to punch, he taught him how to believe in himself. For the first time, Tyson had someone who saw potential instead of trouble. Cus became the father figure he never had, the steady presence he had been praying for without knowing how to ask. Under Cus, the angry boy became disciplined, the outcast became a prodigy, and the frightened kid started to feel like he belonged. But fate can be cruel to those who have already suffered too much. When Tyson began to feel safe, the one loss he could not survive emotionally arrived: Cus's death. That loss wasn't only about a mentor dying, it was about losing the last anchor that held his life together. The champion without guidance. When Tyson entered the ring at 20 and defeated Trevor Berbick to become the youngest heavyweight champion ever, the world saw perfection. He looked unstoppable, a machine built for one purpose: domination. Fans called him a phenomenon, promoters called him a gold mine, and the media treated him like a cultural event. But beneath the roar of the crowd was a boy still grieving a man who had given him his only sense of stability. Without Cus, Tyson was suddenly alone at the exact moment he needed guidance most. His world changed overnight. People who barely knew him began managing his money, shaping his decisions, and controlling his life while pretending to protect him. He didn't notice the manipulation at first. He only saw people surrounding him, flattering him, and promising to help. But the truth was that he was being swallowed by a system built on greed. Fame as a prison with every knockout. Tyson's life became more chaotic. The world saw a champion, but Tyson felt like a prisoner. He had money, fame, and power, but the inner void remained untouched. The more he gained, the more he felt hollow. His circle grew larger, but none of those people understood what he was truly struggling with. He was still the same scared kid from Brownsville, trying desperately to fill a void no title belt could ever heal. The public adored him, but his private world was falling apart. And then came the moment that exposed him in a way the world had never seen before. A moment that shifted public perception and cracked the myth of invincibility. The marriage that unraveled. By the late 1980s, Tyson was more than a champion. He was a cultural icon. When he married actress Robin Givens in 1988, it was celebrated as a new chapter, a fairy tale ending for the troubled boy who had fought his way out of poverty. But behind the glamour, the marriage was a storm. Arguments, distrust, and emotional turbulence became the norm. Tyson struggled with fame, trauma, sleepless nights, and a rage he'd carried since childhood. Givens felt trapped and frightened. The relationship became a pressure cooker that exploded publicly in a now infamous interview with Barbara Walters. Sitting beside Tyson, she described their marriage as torture. Tyson sat silently, looking lost, embarrassed, and devastated. The public watched the champion appear powerless for the first time, and sympathy shifted into suspicion and criticism almost overnight. The collapse that followed. After the interview, Tyson's world spiraled. The humiliation wasn't just emotional, it was public, global, and relentless. He began making reckless choices, trusting the wrong people, and spiraling into dangerous behavior. The more the world judged him, the more he retreated into chaos. His personal life was unraveling faster than he could throw a punch. But this was only the beginning. The next chapter would change him forever and transform him from a troubled champion into the center of one of the most controversial scandals in sports history. The conviction that shattered everything. In 1992, Tyson faced the darkest chapter of his life, a conviction that would haunt him forever. He was found guilty of rape and sentenced to 6 years in prison. For millions, the news was impossible to process. How could the greatest fighter on earth fall so far, so fast? But for Tyson, the collapse felt almost inevitable. He had been spiraling for years, surrounded by people who exploited him and fueled his worst impulses. He maintained his innocence, but the jury saw it differently. When the verdict was announced, the world watched the untouchable champion become an inmate. Sponsors disappeared, the media attacked him relentlessly, and the public turned on him. In prison, Tyson had nothing but time and the ghosts he'd spent his life trying to escape. The return that didn't heal. When Tyson was released in 1995, people wondered if he could rise again. But freedom didn't bring peace. The man who returned was angrier, more unpredictable, and more damaged than the world remembered. The next chapter in his life would become one of the most shocking moments in sports history, and it would make his downfall feel complete. The bite heard around the world wasn't just a scandal, it was a public breakdown. The bite that defined him. In 1997, during his second fight with Evander Holyfield, Tyson entered the ring seeking redemption and revenge. But from the opening bell, Holyfield dominated. Tyson felt himself slipping into that familiar darkness. The rage Cuss had once struggled to control. Each moment of humiliation pushed him deeper into emotional chaos. Then, in a split second, he bit Holyfield's ear. The crowd erupted, the commentators were stunned, and the world watched a champion lose himself completely. When he bit again, it was clear he wasn't simply losing a fight. He was losing control of his life. He was fined $3 million, suspended from boxing, and condemned by fans who once worshipped him. The bite turned him into a global villain, but underneath the outrage was a man drowning in trauma, exploding in the only language he'd ever truly understood: violence. The fall into darkness. The years that followed were a slow-motion collapse. Tyson went from earning over $300 million to being broke. His fortune vanished through reckless spending, lawsuits, dishonest advisors, and misguided generosity. He bought mansions he never lived in, cars he didn't drive, and parties he couldn't remember. His entourage grew as his bank account shrank. He wasn't just financially bankrupt, he was spiritually empty. Drugs and alcohol became his escape, but they only deepened the darkness. He woke up in unfamiliar places, surrounded by strangers, drowning in guilt. He admitted later that he felt like he was waiting to die, trapped in a cycle he couldn't escape. The loss that forced a change. Then, in 2009, tragedy struck in the cruelest way. Tyson's 4-year-old daughter, Exodus, died in a freak accident at home. The loss shattered him. He had endured poverty, abuse, humiliation, incarceration, and public disgrace. But this pain was different. For days he didn't speak. For weeks he barely moved. The fighter who once terrified the world struggled to breathe through grief. Tyson later said that losing Exodus forced him to confront everything he'd been running from his entire life. It pushed him to the brink, but it also became the turning point. Inside that unbearable sorrow, he realized he had one final fight left. Not for a belt, not for money, but for his sanity and his future, rebuilding, truth, and redemption. Tyson began therapy, entered recovery, and cut out toxic people. He learned to speak about his trauma instead of burying it. Slowly, painfully, he rebuilt himself. Not as Iron Mike, not as the villain, but as a man trying to heal. He began telling the truth about his childhood, his mother's neglect, his bullying, and the fear that drove his violence. People listened. They began to see him as a survivor rather than a monster. His one-man show, Undisputed Truth, revealed the man behind the myth. Wounded, messy, funny, heartbreaking, and human. For the first time in decades, Tyson wasn't a headline. He was a person. But as he rebuilt, a new fear emerged. What happens when your body starts to fail, but the world still wants you to be a warrior? The final fight. Mike Tyson's life is a story of extremes, unmatched triumphs and devastating failures. He was built by fear and trauma, crowned by fame, and broken by his own demons. Yet his later years show something more complicated than a cautionary tale. They reveal a man who finally learned to speak the truth he'd been hiding for decades. He didn't become a hero in the way the world expects. He became something rarer, a survivor who refused to let his past define his future. And even now, as his body ages and the world still wants the warrior, Tyson's greatest fight may be the one he never had to win in a ring. The fight to be seen as a human being, flawed and real and still worthy of redemption.